I'm Diane Holt, and you're welcome to Inspire to Act from Thrive Ireland.
And I'm Will Leach. We're back with the help of the Community Relations Council who make this podcast possible.
And we're here to help you think what small thing you might do to make a difference to your community. What might inspire you to act. And we do that by introducing you to people who've already done it. Ordinary people of faith who've made a start and seen God take them on some incredible journeys.
Now, I've no wish to bring back alarming memories of school in your English classes when you might have had to get to grips with Shakespeare and the idea of a play within a play. But we are about to do something similar.
Well, in a bit of an unusual departure, we bring you a podcast within a podcast. Listen to this.
You're listening to Piece by Piece. I'm Jude Hill, and this is a space for us all to get curious together about those who are pushing on against all the odds to build peace. What sparks them?
Well, that's the opening sequence of the podcast Piece by Piece, made here in Northern Ireland, and which is about to launch a brand new series.
Well, the presenter, producer and creator of Piece by Piece is the former UTV journalist Jude Hill, and we are delighted to welcome Jude to Inspire to Act.
Hi Diane, hi Will, lovely to be here.
It's lovely to have you with us. Thanks for coming in.
So, this is a bit weird because, you know, you do a podcast, this is a podcast, but what led you to make Piece by Piece in the first place?
It's actually really funny to sit and listen to the music in another recording studio. So yeah, it definitely does feel a bit surreal, but it does bring me back to the heart of it, which I suppose it was trying to have honest conversations around peace and reconciliation. And you mentioned my journalism career, and as a journalist I was used to every day hearing stories from people and going in and, you know, there was a different story every day. And I suppose the aim was to create a longer form space to try and have more reflective conversations. News has a certain energy, as you know, Will, and I suppose the point was, what if we took the conversations outside the short package and tried to just encourage a bit of self-reflection and, yeah, those sort of humanising spaces where we treat everybody's story with empathy and just really try and bring more space and understanding. Not that doesn't happen within the news, but just the fast-paced nature makes it more difficult. So, yeah, I have a real passion for this place we call home and just, you know, changes that are happening in communities or not happening. And my sense was just, we're not really talking enough, I feel, about peace and reconciliation 2+ decades on from the Belfast Agreement. So it was just a sense of how can we have those conversations with people who are pushing on with peace and maybe who don't always grab the headlines.
There's quite a bit of difference, though, between thinking, I wish we were having better conversations, and undertaking yourself to go and have those conversations. So you're clearly the kind of person who just will get on with it if you see a need.
I hope to be that sort of person. This did take a lot of soul searching, and I did step away from my job as a journalist for 6 months to do it, which did provoke a lot of questions, both outside and internally, for me as well. But in the end, it was something I felt I couldn't not do. I just had this growing sense that was something that I had to do, and I suppose I'd had background in community work, community storytelling projects, and that I always carried with me as a journalist. So it was just that sense of I want to do that more. I really need to explore that. And so yeah, I took the step. And once I took the step, I felt this was very much the right thing to do.
Well, you say you took the step, but I mean, there must have been an incredible amount of preparation. Like, there must have been people and subjects that you really wanted to hear and tease out. And there must have been a sense of frustration as well in the restrictions that I'm assuming, because I obviously don't know much about journalism like you two, but there must have been a certain frustration at the restrictions that brings when you're having to produce a piece.
Yeah, I think I always probably felt a bit of an activist within my journalism. So the stories that I would have been pitching within the newsroom would have been those stories about communities that were more marginalised or, you know, perhaps felt their voices weren't being heard as much. So I suppose it was that activism that I always followed. That's always been there. And I probably entered the journalism world in order to tell those stories. Like I love the energy of news, but I think I was always looking for, who are the communities that are labelled or not heard as effectively. So I think that just probably stayed with me, and in the end I wanted to devote more time to that and not just be pitching those stories, you know, and getting to do them every so often. I wanted a sustained kind of space to really explore that. But yeah, it was difficult. It was a difficult decision. I love my job, but I just felt really strongly about doing it at that point. And I suppose the big picture political stuff was that Stormont was down, and there was so much frustration around that. And how do you channel that? Sometimes you're reporting on that day to day, but there comes times that you want to contribute something, and you want to create those spaces as well, where you're not necessarily seeing it on the big picture political stage at that point.
I'm fascinated by this, though, because there were a couple of big things I can see immediately that you're giving up to go and do it. Now, the first one is 6 months of pay. You're stepping outside from your job for 6 months, so you've got to think, well, how am I going to live, and how am I going to do the dynamics of all of that? But there's another thing about newsrooms. Newsrooms have a buzz about them. There's always something going on. There's breaking news. It can be quite exciting.
And doing a podcast on your own's a bit lonely, maybe?
It's very, very different. And when you step away from that buzz, you wonder how much you're going to miss it. And whenever then you are away from it, your colleagues are like, what on earth's wrong with her? I mean, why on earth would this is the place you want to be? Most of them have had to work quite hard to get to do what they're doing and to get to do that job. And suddenly someone says, I'm not going to do it for 6 months. There must have been people who put their hands on their hips and put their heads on one side and thought, what is she at?
I think there was definitely that, and there were also people who said, like, I'd love to go and do something like that, because I think we all carry around things that in a parallel universe we would get to do. So there was probably a mixed reaction, and I knew myself because I had all those questions inside me, so I understood them all. Yeah, in terms of the buzz of the newsroom, that's definitely something that was a consideration, and I still miss, because I am a people person. I enjoy that buzz, getting out and about, you know, in communities and working with, you know, a team for the day to produce something that is brilliant. That still remains.
Can be very, very satisfying.
Yeah, you've got that story at the end of the day that you've worked on together. So that was definitely something that I did miss. But this was an opportunity post-COVID, I guess, to do something different. And in a way, there was something about COVID reporting that was quite difficult as well, because a lot of it was similar in different locations, you know, talking about the impact of lockdown, and in a way that did have a grinding effect, you know, and so there was probably, I know that's such a cliche to say post-COVID, but there was something about it would be brilliant to do something outside of that sort of wheel, you know, that with day to day had a format to it for quite a long period of time. So I think that was attractive. I did get funding through the Social Change Initiative to host the podcast, so that definitely helped with my decision as well. Yeah, so big thanks to them. But it felt like a social experiment, you know, and I'm glad that my former self did make that decision, because on day one of starting this 6 month project, I did Google how do you set up a podcast, because I didn't know, and I was just sitting in my spare
2 years later I rang
room.
you up and asked you.
You did. So I think it was definitely a social experiment, but I learned so much, I gained so much, and it was such a different format, because, you know, as you know, it is just a different style of conversation, and you bring more of yourself perhaps than in compiling a news report, where you need to have quicker conversations.
Yeah, you've just got so much more time to actually get to know people.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I was just wondering how you chose the people that you've actually had on the had on the podcast, because I've listened to quite a few. I mean, I listened to them way back when it first came out, and I'm delighted that you're going to have a second series, but we'll hear about that later. So how did you choose the people?
This is, good question. I think I was very aware of having a diversity of voice, and I think one of the main motivations was that it was people who were engaged in peace activism or bringing their own creativity or solutions to some of the post-conflict situations, challenges we have. So it wasn't just a case of let's get voices from former days or people with direct proximity to the conflict, although those voices were in it as well. But it was looking at different spheres. It was looking at arts. It was looking at literature. It was looking at the churches and community circles as well, and seeing who is bringing the energy to this work. And I suppose this is probably answering your first question. I was really intrigued by what kept people going, because this place is amazing. I love it, but it is frustrating, and we can feel like we're going around in circles and not getting to new places. And so my curiosity was, what keeps those guys going, amid all the adversities? And so it was probably looking for those people. And I suppose my journalism contacts helped in that, and also some of my previous community work as well. So it's looking at a breadth of voice. And I think as well, Diane, actually, people who are willing to be self-reflective, because I suppose the point was we're not just creating a podcast to listen to people and not reflect ourselves. It's, are people willing to actually be honest about their stories? And one of the questions I ask in the podcast is, what is it in your own backstory, something like a challenge or a loss that you recycled, that you bring that energy now to the work that you do? And the best podcasts then are people who are really willing to look at themselves, because obviously the hope is then, I as the interviewer and all of us listening are actually thinking, well, what is that for us? What have I recycled, or what are my blind spots? And that honesty, I think, I really looked for in guests as well.
And good questions, of course, are really important, and you're very good at asking them. So,
absolutely. There are lots of interviews that stand out, but we're going to hear during the course of this episode a couple of them. One of the earlier ones was with the artist Colin Davidson, and we'll hear some of what he told you in a moment. But what made him a guest you wanted to interview on the podcast, given it was about peacemaking and reconciliation, and he's an artist?
Yeah, Colin was the first podcast guest, and I really sought him out. I've interviewed him as a journalist, and I always thought his voice is beyond any one community. He's someone who has sat with victims and survivors and listened and really taken on their stories. And so it feels like his voice has cut through. It's authentic, and he is someone who has journeyed a lot personally as well. So I think his authenticity, but just his heart on sleeve passion for victims and survivors meant that I was really keen to speak to him.
Well, it's fair to say he's not a particular fan of current legacy plans. Going to hear about that in a moment. But did that intrigue you? I mean, you knew presumably that was something of what you were going to get.
Yeah, that was all circulating at the time of the podcast being released. The British government's approach on legacy was being castigated by all victims and survivors groups. But it was, I think, because Colin had done the silent testimony, a series of portraits. He'd sat in rooms with those survivors for hours on end and had taken on their pain. So I felt like he was a voice for all in a space that where there are so many groups. So yes, that was very much to the fore in the interview, and his anger and passion and zeal really were really strong themes within that conversation.
Well, here's what Colin had to say when you asked him about that series he painted from 2010 onwards. It was called Silent Testimony, Portraits of 18 People Who'd Lost Someone in Our Conflict Here. And Colin felt their voices weren't being heard.
Going back to 1998, on reading the Good Friday Agreement at the time, I realised that there was nothing in it for people who suffered loss through those dark years. There was actually probably plenty in it as I read it at the time, somewhat naively for the people who carried the events out which led to the people's loss. But as time went on, and I think we all hoped as a society that we would address what we did to each other in this place, and ultimately failed to, I came to a conclusion that this massive section of our community was in a sense paying for everybody else's peace. They had to forego answers, justice, that they so dearly required in their lives for a greater good, and a greater good that society could heal if they weren't going to be able to heal. And I realised that the victims and survivors who live in our midst and we pass on the street every day, although we don't know, are the people who we really need to hold up in this society. They are the heroes in the true sense of the word. And whenever I started to make my portrait paintings in 2010, I realised that I might have found a vehicle through which to express how I felt as an artist by simply painting people who suffered loss and who are daily living with that grief, that plight in their lives, hearing the rhetoric of us as a society needing to move on and realising themselves that they can't move on in themselves as a result of where we are.
And you were looking at Colin when he was saying all that, and there were maybe like portraits peeking over his shoulder. It's very, very powerful, obviously, to see him.
Yeah, really powerful. You can hear it in his voice, you can see it in his face, and yes, you can see it in the eyes of the portraits that are in that exhibition. And it is that sense of this is someone who has listened to the depths of this place, and he has a message here that needs to be listened to. And I found that really moving, that sense of, it's easy to say, we deal with the past, we move on. And his point is this section of our society is heroes. How can we listen to them in order to heal? And I think that's a real way of flipping that. This is not a problem to be solved. This is an opportunity to heal. And I think that is really what comes across. And also the avenue of art and that whole creative world to actually assist us in doing that.
Very determined individual, and he talked a lot about his own journey, finding his own voice in his own position, quite literally at times, because he was mocked for having a stammer whenever he was younger. But you were clearly very struck by him.
Yeah, I was, and I continue to be, because he is so consistent. And as you say, he is a man who this message has not gone away for him at all. I was really struck by the honesty around the stammer story, because I suppose when I started the podcast, you don't know what backstories people are going to come up with. And mostly I maybe assumed they would be in relation to the Troubles or what people's memories of that time were. But for him, his zeal for victims actually comes from this sense of a faltering voice and not being able to speak, and the painful process and painstaking process towards then communicating, and how much then he identifies with people whose stories don't make it to the surface. And for me, I suppose that probably sums up what I was trying to do, and actually sums up more concisely than I did right at the start of this podcast. And that is those stories that need to get to the surface, the conversations that we need to have in order to move on. And Colin sort of encapsulates that in both his life and his art.
I'm really interested in the fact that you were looking at people as well who you felt could be self-reflective. I mean, Inspired to Act, very much behind what it is that we're wanting to do is show that it is ordinary people that in the end do extraordinary things. And, that's what we're fascinated by. So we want to hear a bit about Jude, the ordinary person. Where did you grow up? What was your background?
Yeah, so I grew up in a little village called Templepatrick, which everyone knows as on the way to the international airport.
You think of it as the place you're very late going through?
So yeah, we were never late, so to the airport. But yes, yeah, very small village, brilliant mum and dad, and younger, I nearly said younger brother, Rick. And yeah, I suppose just, happy childhood memories and I don't know, family holidays, bad haircuts.
Not now, folks, by the way.
So yeah, that was my base growing up, and then I moved up to Belfast then post uni actually. So I went to Queen's and then moved up to northwest Belfast then in my early 20s because of a youth project that had captured my heart probably over years, which was in Woodvale, just at the top of the Shankill, beside Ardoyne. So yeah, I suppose looking back, like my faith is a big part of growing up. That was really central for me right from being a kid. Again, like my mum and dad were both leaders in our local church, and were very involved in youth and music activities. So it was very childhood, meeting a lot of people, going on, like my dad would have taken us on along on the BB youth camps that he would have led. So I was just always
the girl on the BB youth camp.
Yeah, exactly. So I was
probably still talking about that.
Well, my memory of that is my dad insisting that I go canoeing and do all the activities that the boys would have done. And I always joke with my dad because he famously capsized me when I was quite young because he said I should know how to get out of a capsized boat. That felt quite a lot. But yeah, so loads of fun memories like that. But I think the faith and just quite an activist faith then, that sense of right, how does this radical love that God has for us, how do we transmit that? And that, not that just appeared in my life, but through, I suppose, experiences then within youth projects and different opportunities, that really just became more and more clear to me that was my expression of faith, and
So it was young people you really felt drawn to make a difference in that.
But
area.
in an interfaith community, which was not where you'd grown up, anything like that.
I know that really did change my life, and it was through this amazing bunch of young people. And looking back, they changed me so much. I moved there because I just felt so strongly about that area, and I suppose it was, I'd started as a journalist at that point, and I was so used to the headlines from that part of Belfast, which was about division and interface and rioting and problems. And then I encountered these incredibly open-hearted, loyal young people who, if you believed in them, they believed in you even more, and that it really struck a chord with me, and some of them I'm in touch with on social media, still not as much now, but one of the guys I remember when I was maybe 18, and he said, you'll only be one of us if you move up here, you do know that? And because I was helping with the youth group at the time, but it stayed with me, and I thought I think I do actually want to move in here. And then it escalated where young people sort of telling me that they'd seen a house on their street that it's and just banter, but actually
and here my uncle's single, miss, and all of this.
It just landed. But yeah, just I suppose seeing the stories behind that, and these young people and their potential, and just what they wanted to do in the world, and maybe some of the barriers in their way, that definitely changed me.
So transformative.
Yeah. Big time, yeah. And there were times when there was trouble flaring up there, and I would later stand at that interface as a journalist and see and break my heart over seeing young people caught up in that. And I suppose it was the potential that youth work had of just fostering community with young people and just really getting to know them. And there was obviously that faith dimension, but ultimately what stayed was that sense of relationship and what we shared at that time. And there's stories of young people wanting to get together little gift bags to go over to the other side of the road, and it was a road that some of them hadn't even crossed before, and there was a lot of fear. So it was very formative for me to see what the impact of living in an interfaith community was for some young people, the realities and the fear it engendered for them. But yeah, the amazing amazing possibilities for community as well.
I didn't know this, so I was really delighted to hear it, because I used to look at Tell It in Colour and go, this is great, I wonder who does this. And I've just realised it was you. So is partly as well you wanting to bring something inspirational or a bit more... It's always bad news, isn't it? That's what I think. Unfortunately, you turn the news on and it's apart from the dog story at the end, it's always bad news. But Tell It in Colour wasn't like that. What was your inspiration behind that?
Yeah, and maybe it was my own antidote to being in the news in a way, because I needed to know there were those other stories, and some of them did end up on the news, on mainstream, because I would have then pitched some of those stories. But Tell It in Colour, and it's a really good link to the last question, directly grew from my experience in Woodvale and seeing that group of young people and their label, the label of that community, but all of this incredible wealth beneath that. So it grew directly from that. And the premise was just who's labelled around here, who feels labelled, what communities feel labelled, but what are the alternative stories? What's happening? We all need a bit of hope. We all need to know that is going on. So it was really trying to mine some of those stories, tell them online. We hosted storytelling gigs. It was a brilliant time, a really formative again, and part of it interesting now in terms of some of our issues and challenges around racism, because one of the projects was young people speaking to people who are going through the asylum system, and that was kids from North and West Belfast, and just some of the I suppose light bulb moments that went off and the understanding that grew. So that was really part of it as well, just trying to understand difference.
So there's something about that I'm hearing about unlocking people's potential, but also breaking down perceptions, because we all have perceptions of the other, whoever the other is, and it seems that that's partly what you're trying to do, almost like create space for people to begin to understand the reality rather than perception.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big driving force in my life, and I suppose again it maybe comes from being within the news, where you've got the headlines, and then you've sat in a room with somebody and you've experienced their full story, and how do you tell that story in a way that isn't cliched and that isn't labelled? And there are a lot of very pervasive, persistent labels in Northern Ireland, and it is a big challenge. And I suppose we could get into chatting about peace walls and anywhere where it's harder to get to know people and break down those stereotypes. I do end up feeling exercised about, and it's why I stayed in journalism as well, because there is that power in every story to break that and challenge those. So it probably all links, and it's just different expressions of the same thing, probably.
There's a word I'm hearing over and over again in my head, because I don't think you've actually said it, but it's empathy. One of the things I admire in good journalists is the fact that you can see they're not just doing the story, but they actually have understood something of what the people are going through and at least care a bit. They're empathetic. And you clearly have that. But they also worry me sometimes, because it's a really fast-moving, hard business. And you were in the news business, where sometimes you've got to have sharp elbows, you've got to be hard as nails, and you see some really tough, uncompromising stuff. And that can be a dilemma when you're a nice person having to be hard, and when you're just really upset by something. You talked about having your heart broken as you stood in an interface when there was trouble. Were you too nice for that job? Because I often used to worry I was too nice for that job. My wife says I'm not nice at all.
Well, I can't believe that.
It's so interesting, because you bring yourself in and you evolve and change, but hopefully stay true to your essence as you go. And I know, coming into a Belfast newsroom from a local radio scenario, which was rural, I worked on in Cookstown and Ballymena in local radio, and then coming into a Belfast newsroom is
bit of a change.
Is a different scenario. And I did take it at the start. There were people, because I knew I really wanted to be a broadcast journalist. I wanted to communicate in that way, and I felt strongly about that. But it was definitely asked of me, do you have sharp enough elbows? And it is a question that I absolutely hate and really actually react to, because I always thought I feel strong enough. I feel strong in myself, and I always felt like that would be enough. But then it's in the working out of it, isn't it? It's like I never liked knocking on someone's door if there was a
bereavement.
I would have cried after doing that at times. So there were definitely hard scenarios, but I just think passion for story, like, and that persistence and a care about this place drove me. And I think that is, it's whatever your inner strength is. I don't think journalists need to look a certain way or be a certain way. There are many ways to get stories and to give people the confidence to tell their stories. That is, a different way. It's not just about again, a stereotype.
I think we were the journalists that editors hated, actually, because we both felt, and Diane, you will have sussed it, Jude and I used to meet each other out in the road, working for different companies. I think we both felt, there's room for both of us and there's room for all of us, and we do it in our own way.
Yep.
And you don't want to be the person that everybody else hates having met. And you never did that, for the record. So well done. You didn't have to get round the world and go to some places.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I'm really interested because you're obviously passionate about Northern Ireland, but you got the opportunity to go to lots of other places. And I find, certainly in the work of Thrive Ireland, that bringing learning actually back to Northern Ireland from some of those places is important. But I mean, my goodness, you were in South Africa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Zambia, Mozambique, India. And how did you end up in all those different places?
And that was just the one story.
Yeah, lots of them were through UTV, actually, which I'm so thankful for those opportunities. And it is like you, Diane, probably, where you're saying you go and then you see things that you connect. And some of it was that, like, probably, I don't want to pick out one trip, but when you say that connection of home and what you see internationally, the trip to South Africa was incredible for that, because we travelled out with UTV and a group of young people from North and West Belfast who were going to the Cape Flats.
Oh, brilliant.
And they were seeing and experiencing a gang intervention project there. And, then they were opening up conversations about coercive paramilitary control in their own communities. And that was very, very powerful to see. Just some of, again, what rose to the surface, and just these young leaders from Belfast going back in to their own communities. So I think things like that, where there are the links, but I suppose for me it was just constantly, just that horizon broadening experience where you saw life through a different lens, and it wasn't necessarily linked to here, but just seeing people in adverse situations be resilient and be joyful, or, share their story of overcoming challenge with you was always just something, like, I always just found that moving. And you mentioned the DRC there, which is probably the trip that has impacted me the most, and it was a daunting trip to go on, but probably one of the most beautiful experiences of my life, because I got to meet survivors of gender violence, very extreme gender violence, and just encounter their stories, some of them faith stories, and just what they had overcome and what they wanted to share with the world. I think each trip, it changes you, and the opportunity to share people's stories. I take it seriously, and it's like, but just the experience and the dignity of people in some of those situations. It stays with me. Yeah.
You see, again, little bells chiming. You love telling people stories. It's exactly what Diane and I are doing right now. And we love telling people stories too. And yet you and I, Jude, both stepped away from the day-to-day world of news journalism and out of a newsroom. I'm just an ancient old git, so I'm doing different things. But you've stepped into the third sector. You've gone into the voluntary sector. Tell us what you're doing now and why you want to be doing it.
Yeah, so I currently work for Save the Children in Northern Ireland as their media manager, which is, again, really just a role that's focused on storytelling and trying to amplify the voices of those who need to be heard. So in this case, children living in poverty in Northern Ireland. It's a very varied role because Save the Children is an international NGO. So we are communicating about conflicts all over the world and the impact they have on children, but then really advocating for children, the rising number of children who live in poverty in the UK and Northern Ireland particularly. So yeah, I stepped out and into that job last year, and it's been a steep learning curve. It's a very different sector, so I've had to get my head into a different mindset for it, but it's been really expanding, and it's been really interesting seeing it from the other side, because now I am the person harassing and annoying journalists with press releases and follow-up phone calls and DMs and saying, this is a story, guys, come on. So I'm enjoying that side of it, and I'm really trying to get the advocacy side of it out there, and some of the messages up to Stormont and beyond.
Brilliant. Can I come back to Piece by Piece? You know, we were both struck by a more recent episode with the activist and campaigner Megan Fair, and she's particularly interested in working with young people. Like you were talking about your passion for young people as well, and tackling the issues of human trafficking, something that actually does happen here. I think we've got a clip, haven't we, of
we're going to hear
Megan,
where Megan tells you about the challenges she and other young people face.
The challenge of being alive. You know, sometimes I find that very difficult, and as a teenager and as a young person, I find that very difficult. Struggling with depression and suicidal idealisation and all of that stuff. People who meet me say I'm so bubbly and I'm so this, that and the other, and put that on me. But actually, the challenge of being alive is quite difficult. And that's then something that I'll just go full speed the opposite direction into radical hope. So I bring that to young people who are telling me about things, about wanting to not be alive anymore, wanting to disappear. That's a common theme in my life, that feeling of wanting to disappear. So I actually can bring that knowledge as personal experience and say, you know what, there's hope, and this is what hope looks like. Hope looks like finding a passion and fighting against things. Hope looks like, actually speaking truth to power, and saying those things that matter, and helping change your community and this society, and letting people recognise you and letting you take up space. So that would be the kind of easiest and most difficult answer, because nobody wants to think about the bubbly girl that's, struggled with all these things. But that's what makes me so impassioned in my work, because we have a right to life. We have a right to, children are human beings. They're not human becomings. And they have a right to exist and take up space in this life. And I want to just pour that over them and say, and give them that hope of, you deserve a life that's full of great things. And the fact that someone's exploiting you or taking you for granted or whatever, I'm going to rage against that with you.
I think it's fair to say that was a quite remarkable answer, and it was actually recorded in a public meeting, so then there was applause for Megan after that. It's no surprise that people were struck by what she said there.
Yeah, it's an incredible response, and it really does sum her up. And I think why I loved her episode was because she is a young person really animated by what she is seeing in her community around her. And I think there's an activism where we can tend to look internationally and all of the horrors that are happening, which we need to be shouting about. But sometimes we can be more silent about what we're seeing in our own communities. And Megan, as a youth worker, is seeing exploitation by paramilitaries, and that is really what animates that answer that you heard there. And she is really putting words to that, to call that out as coercion. And you may have heard her in some of the mainstream outlets kind of saying similar things, but to reflect it back to herself, her own struggle within her own life and identity. There's such an honesty to that, and she identifies with those that she's seeing then in the community struggling in this way.
So deeply personal, though. I think a lot of interviewers would struggle with that. And to your credit, you didn't, even though you were in a room full of people. But nobody would be expecting an answer like that, I think.
No, she is so hard on sleeve, and we were obviously talking about the work, but yes, to strip that back to that being her core challenge, it does stop you in your tracks. The room was full of fellow youth and community workers who showed her that solidarity, I think, which made that a space where she felt she could. And Megan is someone who is a friend of mine, so there is that relationship there as well. But that is the honesty she brings into her work. It's why it makes her so effective and such a passionate voice. And I think her message in her generation is, we need to be speaking out about this, and that is why you can hear the energy. She talks about the rage. She's like, this is going on. We need to be raising our voices. She's brave, very brave girl.
Yeah, that is really brave. I just loved her passion, and it was so, all the stuff that she was saying was so biblical. You know, we need to be people of hope. We need to be enabling people to step into their full potential, to thrive and flourish. I mean, she's basically preaching the gospel. But I think that's why I love these podcasts, because that's what we want. We want to see the inspiration of people like her, like yourself, and so I'm really interested in what inspired and inspires you, because I think that's what drives people in the end.
I think it is hearing those moments, because you know that someone has dug deep in themselves, and that is almost a gift, you know, to you, to me in that moment. And it's then what inspires and drives me is to lift that up, and for that person to know that I see that as a gift, you know. And I suppose what ultimately inspires me is that this place is made up of all of these activists with this energy, and that has to go somewhere, and you know that is charged with change. You know, I'm probably no different in that what drives me is the things that aren't changing about this place. You know, I look around and I see the peace walls, and you know, I speak to young people. Last year, actually, as part of a programme for UTV, I spoke to a young girl who lived on the other side of a peace wall, or close to a peace wall, who said, I want to know the people over there, but there's just not really any avenue for me to. I want to go walk on that road, but I want to be normal. And that sort of the non-normalcy, that's not the right word, but you know what I mean, that drives me, because I want to see a greater freedom for this place. I want to see those young people be able to move around, you know, inverted commas, normally. And for the segregation to end. So the things that still aren't right are what drives me. The people who are trying to make it right inspire me. I feel inspired by my own, I suppose, drive to try and contribute to that, and all of that. I think we can see greater freedom, greater peace, but it's going to take. It's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of honesty. And I just want to try somehow to contribute to that.
The exciting news is that you're now recording in between coming and seeing us for the new series of Piece by Piece. How's that going?
It's going well. It's a funny process, because in preparation even for chatting to you guys today, I have been listening to the first series, and I've said to Diane before we came on, I've listened to it with kinder eyes now, or kinder ears, sorry, where I think these are useful conversations, and now suddenly I feel a pressure for the second series.
Oh, the difficult second album.
And also coming into your lovely studios, where yesterday I was just found in the corner of a room with drying clothes around me, trying to record an interview. Yeah, I feel again a real drive to do it, and actually talking to you guys today has helped me again to almost put words to it, the need for it. So I'm excited. We've a range of people we're speaking to again, people with very strong lived experiences and passions, and that is a theme throughout. So I'm excited. I'm recording a few more this week, and hoping to put it out maybe into early 2025, and just putting it out into the world and seeing what happens.
For all the people thinking, I want to listen to that, help them with the spelling when they go a-Googling.
Yes, there are variations, or different versions of this, but it's PEACE by PIECE.
Peace, not war.
Yes.
By piece, bit by bit.
That is it. Yeah, that's a good tagline, maybe. Yeah. So, and it's on Spotify and Apple. So yeah, I will probably be blasting the social media channels when it's coming out. So hopefully people will know.
So if you want conversations where you just hear people's honesty, people's transparency, people self-reflecting, but also hear stories that are also really inspirational and maybe enable some of those really difficult challenges that you've been highlighting that cause the frustrations, maybe it'll help somebody else to step into the space that's required, because that's what this is all about. We're all about inspiring people just to take the step of what it is that they're being called to do if they just dare to do it.
It is the same hope in that I hope that these conversations then spark wider conversations in homes or even in communities where we all reflect together, and it's not about this group needs to just sort themselves out. It's like all of us, like what have we carried, what do we bring, and how do we look at it and heal together.
Jude, I want to thank you for coming in and talking to us so candidly and with such fascinating stories and giving us an insight into what you do. I know it is weird for a journalist to be asked all about themselves. So thank you for putting up with us, and thank you for coming to see us.
Yes, thank you so much. And the first series of Piece by Piece with Jude Hill is online and you can listen now. And series 2, she's just told us, is about to be released in January 2025. Go and have a listen.
And thank you for listening to us. Thanks to Commission Christian Radio for helping us make this series and providing Studio 2 here. If you have a thought or a comment about Inspired to Act, you can send us a text from all the major podcast platforms if you look in our episode blurb. We'd love to hear from you, especially if you're nice.
Yes, we would love to hear from you. You can find out more about Thrive Ireland at thriveIreland.org. We're on Instagram and Facebook too, and we have a YouTube channel. And there are details of our campaign Give 5 to Thrive on lots of our social media channels.
We'll be back very soon, but for now, goodbye.
Bye.